Maddie's in the panelist. Can you?
Just promoted her.
Perfect. All right. Beth is just in the closed already. So let's just move forward on reading the stuff and get into whatever.
Okay. So this meeting is being held in compliance with the Open Public Meetings Act with the annual notice advertised in the Trenton Times. The meeting notice was provided to the Hunterdon County Democrat and the Trenton Times, sent to department heads, members on the listserv, and was posted on the glass doors of the elevator entrance at City Hall. The meeting agenda was posted on the bulletin board at City Hall and on the website at www.lambertvillenj.org. This session will be recorded using Zoom, and the recording will be posted to the city's website.
Can I get a roll call?
Councilman Sanders. Nope, you're muted. Okay.
Here.
Councilwoman Taylor. Councilwoman Urbish.
Here.
Mayor Fall.
Here. Can I get a motion to go into closed session to discuss contract negotiations?
So move.
Councilwoman Urbish for the first, Councilman Sanders for the second. All in favor say aye.
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 Aye. All right. We'll see you in another meeting.
Shall I
Okay.
read the statement of compliance?
Please do.
This meeting is being held in compliance with the Open Public Meetings Act with the annual notice advertised in the Trenton Times. The meeting notice was provided to the Hunterdon County Democrat and the Trenton Times, sent to department heads, members of the listserv, and was posted on the glass doors of the elevator entrance at City Hall. The meeting agenda was posted on the bulletin board at City Hall and on the city's website at www.lambertvillenj.org. This session will be recorded using Zoom, and the recording will be posted to the city's website. Thank you.
Can I get a roll call?
Councilman Sanders.
Here.
Councilwoman Taylor.
Here.
Councilwoman Urbish.
Here.
Council President Asara.
Here.
Mayor Fall.
Here. Can I ask everybody to rise for the Pledge of Allegiance and remain standing for a moment of silence? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. I'm going to ask everyone to remain standing for a moment of silence for our military and armed forces who are at home and abroad, and all those who are fighting on the front lines of the COVID-19 pandemic. Thank you. Before we get started on our bills list and our consent agenda, I just want to take a moment to thank everybody who volunteered as a poll worker and to thank Cindy Ege for all the work that she did on Election Day to make that run smoothly. We had an extremely high turnout, and I'm really proud of the city of Lambertville for showing up. Okay, so can I get a motion on our bills list?
So moved.
Second.
Second for Councilwoman Taylor. All in favor say aye.
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 Okay, Council President, can I kick this over to you?
Yes. So we have a consent agenda tonight. And we are working through numbers 136, 2020 through 141, 2020, but we've removed 139. Is that correct, Mayor?
That's correct.
All right. So any questions from the council on these resolutions before we go any further?
Councilman Urbish?
Nope, I was just tucking a stray hair.
Councilwoman Taylor?
I have a question on the Clark Caton and hints not to exceed. How does this relate to what we discussed on October 22nd?
I believe that's 139, and that's the one we're removing.
It's 138, at least on the copy I'm looking at.
So this was approved through the ordinance, but now we need a resolution allowing awarding the contract to both them to do the cat work and to do the police site work.
So we changed their not to exceed and now we're resolving on the contract.
Right, and we already had funds available for this, if I remember
Correct.
correctly, right? Okay.
This is us just doing the back work on the paperwork. Any other questions regarding the consent agenda?
All right, so I'd like to ask for a motion to approve resolutions 136-2020 through 141-2020, except 139.
So moved.
Second,
Councilwoman Urbish, and was that Councilwoman Taylor? Okay,
Yes.
thanks. And Cindy, could you get a roll call, please?
Councilman Sanders,
Yes.
Councilwoman Taylor,
yes.
Councilwoman Urbish,
Yes.
Council President Sarah,
Yes.
Mayor Fall.
Yes.
I'm sorry, can I interrupt for just 1 second? Did we, I know we've been a little bit about when the public comments, have we resolved when the public comment section is or sections will be for today's meeting?
So we are the only, let me just make sure here. We have a first reading of 2 separate ordinances. So we have no public hearings this evening, just sort of introductions. My understanding, and I'm happy to hear from the council, is that we would like to no longer accept public hearing, sort of public comment for non-required public hearings in between pieces of legislation. We do have a big, obviously a big project plan that I think people are going to have questions on. If you'd like, we can hold a public comment section directly around the Clausen ordinance and then save the rest of public comment to the end. Does that sound like a reasonable?
Yeah, I mean, I just want expectations clear because I know that members of the public may be, wondering at what point they can interject their comments. So I just want to make sure that the public is clear and we're clear as to when that process is taking place.
Yeah, I appreciate you helping me out on this. So, I mean, is everyone amenable with holding public comments specifically on the Clausen site after the presentation?
Yeah, I think that makes sense. I think some of the confusion was, and forgive me because I missed our last council meeting, so I don't know if there were changes made there. I know we were holding a public comment section at the outset of a meeting and then at the end of the meeting to give time, 2 different times for people, which we didn't have one at the outset of this meeting. I do think it makes sense to field questions because I think there will be questions. It's a big idea, and it'll also give us an opportunity if there's questions that we don't have answers to today to have the time to go and get those answers before the formal public hearing.
Okay. So with that, Cindy, would you mind escalating Sarah Gold if Sarah could raise her hand? Here, perfect, thank you. All right, so if you guys don't mind, I'm going to share my screen, and we're gonna sort of talk a little bit. Give me 1 second here. We're going to talk a little bit about the sort of proposal at hand. Can everybody see that?
Yeah.
Okay, great. So as most folks I think who are on this call are aware, but if not, we're just going to sort of level set here. The city is proposing to move forward on the acquisition of the Clausen property, which includes obviously Homestead Market, Washington's headquarters, as well as several historic barns and greenhouses, and obviously their family home here. The idea is that this is a culturally significant portion of property. It's on the open market now, and has underlining zoning of somewhere between 12 and 30 units that could be built on this site. The council and myself have done some due diligence and done sort of the necessary work to ensure that we are able to afford this acquisition and to do some of the kick the tires work, but that functionally the timeline of this would be to engage with the Clausens in a contract of purchase to remove this site from the market so that we're not competing with a developer who potentially any developer who may want to potentially redevelop this property. And it would allow for us to do the necessary due diligence from the city in order to ensure that this was a worthwhile investment of the public funds. So I want to flesh out that idea a little bit first, and then I'll go into sort of the timeline of what this looks like, and then ultimately the agreement that we'll be voting on the November 30th meeting. So the idea here would be that there's about 8.4 acres of land that is the Clausen site. It houses the historic Washington headquarters, as well as several of these barns and the farm market. What we'd like to do is put the existing buildings into an exemption zone, which is about I believe it's 1.3 acres of exemption. And then the rest of the site would be preserved in perpetuity as open space. Now, we have agreed to work with the New Jersey Conservation Fund, as well as the New Jersey Conservation Fund, as well as the Hunterdon Land Trust, to work with the city after we've acquired the property and taken this property off the market, to work through the state and county sort of process of being repaid for those preservation dollars. Then, over the course of the next 6 months, we're going to study how best to sort of use this property. We're hoping to find some partnership in the maintenance of this historic home, preferably but with a partner that will open this historic house to the public. And we'd like to be able to work to continue to have this be a operating farm market that's still, generating benefit to the community. The idea would be to potentially use this barn here as a available community meeting space for, artwork, for bands, for, organizations like Lambertville, New Hope, Indivisible, to be able to meet on, and have municipal gathering space. We would use this potential portion here and the greenhouses as available community gardening space, which is allowed within the sort of frame of preservation. And then finally, we're going to study whether or not it makes sense for the city to basically do a small renovation on this project, adaptively reuse this home, and turn it into the final home for the police site. During the course of this 6-month study, we expect to have another option for the final home site for the police department. We're in negotiations with that site now. Unfortunately, we're not prepared at this time to announce those to the public because we're still in negotiations, but we expect to be able to do that before the 30th, and then to flesh out both of these ideas over the course of the next several months as we do our due diligence on the property. We expect to be able to, along in partnership with an architect, a city planner, and multiple other experts, be able to do a series of studies over between now and March, and the end of March, to be able to provide the public with as much information as possible, right? Environmental studies, appraisals, whatever we sort of need in order for us to be able to to ensure that this is a good investment for the community. And we're going to be working in partnership with the community advisory team in order to do that. So I'd like to, at this time, sort of reintroduce Sarah Gold, who's our community advisory team, one of our community advisory team co-chairs, to talk a little bit about how we're going to be working with the CAT over the course of this potentially exciting public project.
Thanks so
So-
much, Mayor. So again, I'm Sarah Gold. I'm one of the co-chairs of the CAT along with Paul Kuhl. And the CAT is really excited to engage with the community and council and the mayor on this possibility. So basically what we see as our role over the next several months is that from now until the end of November, the CAT will be providing any input to council about recommended studies that we think might be useful in terms of gathering additional information. And through the end of December, we'll be continuing to do Q&As with the mayor, council, and other members or other people who might have additional information here. So you can see our first Q&A on this site, which is up on the city's Facebook page. Mary Barno, one of our members, did that with the mayor earlier this week. And then from January through the middle of March, we anticipate reaching out to the community to get input on values for making recommendations as to where the police site will go, whether it's at the Clausen site or at a different option, like the mayor mentioned, being under negotiations. And in order to do that, we anticipate having office hours and doing surveys, and we're also willing to get creative as well with other ways of reaching out to people. So we've done office hours and surveys in the past. We've had hundreds of people, many of whom are on the call tonight, engage with us, and we're looking forward to doing that. But if you have any other ideas for outreach, we would welcome them. And if you have any questions for the Q&As that you'd like to send our way, that would be great. You can reach us at catchairs@lambertvillenj.org. So we look forward to engaging with you. Thank you.
Mayor, could I add one thing?
Yes.
One
Councilor Taylor, go ahead.
correction, just because you were talking about some numbers earlier. You mentioned it's 8.4 acres. Survey size is 8.85 acres, which is important for us to note. And the underlying zoning is actually not in question. It's 1.3 acres per unit. The density regulations rule the way the ordinance is written. So that gets us to 11.5 units per acre, rounded up to 12. 12 units total, which would include the existing headquarters, which means it's possible to build 11 units under existing zoning.
Okay, thank you for that clarification, Councilwoman. Councilwoman Urbish, did you have something to add there?
Yeah, I just wanted to clarify the unit thing, and obviously that's the underlying zoning, and that can be changed. You know, a property owner can come in and ask for a change to that. So just want to be clear on that.
Yeah, and okay, so I appreciate the clarification there, Councilwoman Taylor. All right, so I think at this time, I'd like to talk a little bit about our next steps. We expect to introduce, or excuse me, to move forward on this ordinance. If we introduce tonight, we expect to move forward on this ordinance on November 30th. At that time, we would also release an RFP for the architectural and city planning services required for us to start to dig into the question of if this is a worthwhile investment to rehome the police site there. We'll then start looking towards some of the other potential studies that we may need to do, including title searches and environmental surveys, etc. So we expect before the end of before January 1st of 2021, to be able to have a pretty a hard number on the entire total cost of either this adaptive reuse of the Clausen's personal property or any alternate option at that time. And so then as we move into 2021, we'll be continuing to do our studies, and ultimately we should be wrapped up with the 6 months of due diligence that the city is currently planning by the end of April. I just want to say here that I think this is a really exciting potential opportunity. The city has done a lot of work to manage the some of the initial questions, right? Is this really feasible? Is it affordable? And we have come to the conclusion that yes, it in fact is feasible and affordable. And now the question is this a worthwhile next step for our community? So I want to thank everybody on the from the council for working with us on this project, and to open up for any questions from the council. Councilman Urbish.
Okay, I just want to make a couple of clarifying points. So what you were just talking about in sort of like next steps and timeline about studies and having hard numbers, the goal there, just so I'm clear, is to have clear sort of costs associated with multiple options for a new home for the police site. That's sort of a separate effort from the preservation piece. That's correct?
Yes, I think this is an opportunity for us to be working on simultaneous tracks,
Okay.
regardless of whether or not the Clausen's home makes final financial sense and sort of planning sense for our community as a site to rehome the police. Ultimately, the argument here is that this preservation project is an important next step in ensuring that this site isn't overdeveloped, and that we can maintain a pristine tract of land in our community that has a lot of historical and cultural significance.
Okay, and then I think it's a little confusing what the process is here. So can we talk a little bit about what it is that's being introduced tonight, and should we vote to introduce it, and what it looks like, what kind of protective measures the city is putting in place for itself should this move forward? I just want to be very clear about what it is we're doing, and what it is we're doing, what we're not doing, and how we're making sure that we're protecting the city in this situation.
Absolutely. So first, I guess I'll kick this over to Bill to explain the structure of the ordinance and then I can get into some of the details of the agreement that we're working to negotiate with the Clausens.
So municipalities are authorized under the local lands and buildings law to purchase property. The purchase has to be authorized by an ordinance. So that's the ordinance on the agenda tonight. It'll be voted on for introduction tonight. If it moves forward, second reading and public hearing will be held at the November 30th meeting. At which point, if the Clausens choose to accept the city's offer, there will be substantially the final, close to the final agreement. I mean, the large deal points will be in place at that point. May still be working on some fine tuning, but we'll have close to the final agreement, hopefully by the 30th. At which point, upon adoption, the mayor is authorized to sign the contract to purchase the property. At this point, the city's offer includes, an extended due diligence period that allows the city to take the necessary steps to, make a determination as to certain feasibility issues and, the normal real estate purchase due diligence issues that any buyer of, commercial property essentially would undertake. And, in this instance, because, the city asked for these guidelines, it's going to be extended out a little bit more than the usual 60 to 90 days. The city is really going to take its time and try to make the right decision here. So that's procedurally where we are right now. Is there anything specific as to
Yeah, and I think I can get into to answer sort of the secondary portion of your question, Councilwoman Taylor. So a part of the negotiated agreement as a part of the extended due diligence period, we are going to place a small down payment on with the Clausens for that property. That down payment will be funded entirely by the open space tax, which is a tax that already 1% of your taxes already is open space. So we have that fund available to do preservation work like this. We'll be using that fund to put a down payment. We have negotiated that for the first 2 months of our agreement, that down payment will be refundable if there's some significant issue found within sort of the normal due diligence period that would make this preservation project entirely untenable or inviable. After that 2 months, then a portion of that down payment will go hard. It will become non-refundable. And then we'll have our secondary round of due diligence, including some of those larger studies. And then finally, we'll sort of march down that path until we come to, our final conclusion. Now, this is all still being negotiated, but we'll have that final agreement prior to November 30th. And we think we've managed to mitigate some risk in terms of the public dollar, while still approaching this in an aggressive way to ensure that we can gain exclusivity on the site, and so that we're not competing in the open market against a potential developer.
Okay, that's helpful. I wanted to make sure that that is clear for the public, that there would be a number of sort of, for lack of a better term, outs at various points in this process by which the city can, and they would be clearly laid out. We obviously want to be respectful and protective of both parties here, but that, the talking about this now, there are a number of sort of fail safes that would be built in as well.
Yeah, absolutely. We are, I am really excited about this project. I think it's really worthwhile to work towards preserving this property. But ultimately, this is a negotiated real estate deal, and we want to make sure that we're putting the city's best foot forward, being able to protect the public dollar and make sure that we have enough room to really study this thing like we need to before we make this final purchase.
And then just one final question, because I know you touched upon it, sort of uses of the other structures on the site. The city we already have facilities challenges. And so I know this is something that, had been brought up here and there in the sort of due diligence period as these studies are going on. It's my understanding that there would also be conversations about, the site you mentioned, the historical building, having a historical society or some entity sort of take on maintenance and operation of that structure. So that conversation would also be going on during this those conversations would be going on during the due diligence period.
That's correct. Yeah. So and thank you for asking that question. I mean, I think we all agree that the city should not take on the care and maintenance of yet another 19th century or 18th century structure. We are, as a part of this ongoing conversation, we are working with a lot of experts here who are going to help us to ensure that the maintenance of both the farm market and the historic Washington's headquarters is not sort of on the responsibility of the city. If we decide not to move forward in rehoming the police at the Clausens' current residence, we would then have to have a conversation about alternate uses of that site. And sort of, over the course of the next 6 months, those options are on the table, and we're open and willing to hear them.
Thank you.
Are there any other questions or comments from council?
Mayor, one quick word. You very quickly touched upon sort of the speed of this. And I know sometimes members of the public are and sometimes justifiably concerned about the speed with which we move. You know, we just started talking about this and all of a sudden there's an ordinance. You touched a little bit upon the urgency and why the speed with which we're moving to this first ordinance. Can you speak to that a little bit? Because I think it'd be helpful for the audience.
Certainly. Look, at this point, we are competing in the open market for a very desirable piece of property. The likelihood that this property, upon sale to a non-government or not-for-profit organization, maintaining the look and feel of it, what it looks like right now, is very, very low. We know that we sort of, unfortunately, because of the nature of this property, we have one shot at maintaining this property in perpetuity as pristine historic farmland, and sort of being able to invest in the historic and rural nature of our community. That is why we're moving so quickly. Once we have this ordinance in place and we have an agreement to sign this contract, then we move into what I think is a very fastidious phase 1 and phase 2 study of the site to ensure that we've really done our due diligence here and that we have time to go and talk to the community and do this in concert with the community advisory team and our community members. So I think this is while this feels fast for this ordinance, this is really giving us the opportunity and the space to not compete in the open market and do a full deep dive on our due diligence. Does that answer your question, Councilman?
Yes, it does.
Okay. Yeah, and so I think with that, are there any other questions from the council before we open up for public comment?
Mayor, I just want to say, it's a very exciting opportunity. I think we have a lot of due diligence to do yet, as you've spoken about. I think you've put a great plan before us where we're going to have a lot of out clauses, that'll protect us and ultimately protect the Clausens too. I think it's a very large undertaking, but I think in the end, if we're able to do it for generations to come, that hill will look like that hill, just like what we did behind the school, right? And it's kind of a forever thing. So I just wanted to say that. And my other question was around the timeline and the details, which Councilwoman Erbish addressed.
Yeah, and I can if you give me 1 second here, give me 1 second. I can just quickly share sort of what the look of the the next steps are. Give me 1 second. I'm sorry about this. I'm trying to share my screen and I am losing steam here. So if you guys can see here, so this is sort of where we are over the course of the next, functionally the next 2 months. We've informed the public with a letter, an email, video. We're introducing the ordinance tonight. We'll then submit a at-risk letter to the state. This is a formal sort of flag for Green Acres and the county that these properties are up for potential preservation and that the city is working towards that goal. We'll then have the second reading, and during that second reading also release an RFP for architectural and planning services to answer the question of either the Clausen property or the other properties in question, what the cost differential for those would be. And then by the end of the year, we'll be able to vet out as a community what those costs are, and then move to the CAT for the CAT to really work with the community to hear about what values outside of just the costs, what values the community would like to consider in choosing between the Clawson site or another potential site for the police station. And so,
Mayor Fall, can you talk a little bit more, just a little more clearly about what that cost comparison will entail and how we are going to be considering what the final needs are for the police site? And I'm asking, one, I think the audience probably would appreciate more clarity, but two, because we understand that the CAT's phase 2 responsibilities are to be considering our facilities as a whole, which includes needs for the police site. So I want to try to avoid confusion early.
yeah, absolutely. So the city will be working directly with an architect and a planner at both the Clawson's residence and any other sites that we deem feasible for to study for the police. We will then we're going to be working directly with Lieutenant Brown to identify needs, including any statutory needs, but also needs that the police department has, ways in which our current building could be working better, ways in which, we could be improving on a new building within reason. We will then take those and get the costs of implementation. So what the actual build out costs will be there. And then, the CAT will, once the council and the community advisory team has those studies, then we can move forward on making decisions specifically about rehoming the police. Unfortunately, this bifurcates their larger goal of the phase 2 of the community advisory team, which is to consider our facility needs as a whole. But we've heard loud and clear from the community that tying our whole facilities question to, every facility question to the our timeline around rehoming the police and the affordable housing plan really rushed that conversation. And that was a conversation that the community wanted more time to consider. And so, we'll be making sort of this first phase 2A of where the police go with the community advisory team while they work on a longer term plan to address our facility needs writ large, whether or not that's a reinvestment in the buildings that we currently own or some other model.
So that means that our goal by the end of the year, we intend to know what it will cost for a new police site and what it will cost to move the police site.
That's correct.
Okay, so and I think that's important for everybody to understand. We've talked about this a lot in a lot of meetings, and we certainly understand the frustration of community members who want to know the answer to that. We don't have it yet. Our goal is to have it in the next month and a half.
That's correct. We did do some initial due diligence on that property to see really even if this was feasible or possible at all. So we worked with a local architect who donated their services to walk through the police site, the current police home with Lieutenant Brown and talk about his needs, talk about what works, talks about what doesn't work, what we're statutorily required to have at a police department, and then walked around the Clawson's residence to see whether or not we would be able to check all of those boxes. We then did something similar with another resident who volunteered their time, who was a facilities manager for the state, to see what adaptive reuse projects like this, where the cost drivers are, and whether or not he felt like this was a reasonable next step. And I made a commitment to the council to not sort of bring this forward to the community at large if this really wasn't if this was an obvious this isn't going to work. So ultimately, again, and I want to really reiterate this, regardless of whether or not the police end up being finally rehomed at that site, I think it is worth investing in the long-term preservation of this site. But to your point, we will have final hard numbers on what it will cost to move the police and what it will cost to whatever sort of redevelopment or build we need to do to get a final police station by the end of this year, December 31st, 2020. Any other questions from the council? Hearing none. Tina, would you invite the first question asker?
Yep, so it's Mr. Harris. Tina's actually had to sign on to the library meeting because they're having technical difficulties. So Mr. Harris, you are the first person, and I'm going to promote you to speak.
Okay, hello. Whoops. Okay, hello. This is Stephen Harris, 42 Perry Street. First of all, Mayor, I do support this. I think it would be valuable for the community. Just driving, driving home to see the Clausens, this old barn and things like that would be tremendous. And so, kudos to you. What I didn't hear, and I think a lot of people be interested in knowing, was the finances for the purchase of the property. Now, I maybe I missed it, but could you reiterate how you would do this and how it would be tax neutral?
Certainly, and thank you for the question. So here's what we know. You know what, actually, I'm just gonna go ahead and share my screen while we're doing this. Give me 1 second here. Apologies. I should have been more prepared for this. We know that the city has some immediate financial concerns that we have been talking to the public quite a bit about. I'm sure you guys have heard us say it before. Let's see here. Can everybody see my screen? What's exciting about this project, because it's primarily an open space project, right? We're studying whether or not we would be able to put the police site there, but ultimately this is a preservation first project. Because of that, we can use a portion of tax funds called the open space tax. You already pay this tax. It goes into a specific fund that's for preservation and maintenance of open space. So right here, this gray line here is our current debt obligation plus the new debt we would be bringing on for the Clausen. We would be paying both the down payment for the property and the down payment of the initial bond through open space, which means this is a tax you've already paid. It's already sitting in an account, and this is what that account is built for preservation projects. Now, over the course of the conversation with the council and with some advisors, we had initially thought about using that open space tax as to cover a significant majority of the debt obligation on this project year over year moving forward. But rather than do that, we wanted to instead maintain that open space tax to specifically address maintenance issues, not just maintenance of this new Clausen site, mowing, leaf and brush pickup, tree removal, et cetera, but to also address some of the other maintenance concerns in the community, including the Cherry Street lot behind Ely Field, Arnett Park, et cetera, where we've used these open space the places that we've used open space funds to acquire. So right now, this yellow line here is the current debt service expenditure for the city. It's $1.5 million a year. So this assumes no new taxes between now and 2052, which I'm good, I'm not that good, but let's say for argument's sake here that we do not increase the city's budget at all. So the total pie of the $6.2 million that is currently budgeted, $1.4 million of that is currently being paid towards debt service. However, our debt service obligations beginning in 2023 take a significant dip. And in 2024 to 2025, an even larger dip. So we do not have to increase our total expenditures on debt service to have zero tax impact for paying this debt service. And actually, what's really exciting about this is that even with this acquisition and an expected $350 to $500 a year in capital expenditures to do things like maintain our cars, maintain our street sweepers, et cetera, maintain our roads, we will still, by 2033, we will be under the state's best practice debt load. So not only is this tax neutral, this plan allows us to preserve property that we know is culturally important to our community and put us on a road in 13 years, as long as we maintain the more responsible borrowing year over time. This puts us on track to be more financially stable as a community in about 13 years.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Cindy, I think we had Sandy was up next.
Okay, Sandy, I'm promoting you. I'm allowing you to talk.
Yeah, I should be muted.
Stephen, you are not muted. There we go.
Can you hear me?
We can hear you, Sandy.
Okay, thank you very much. Sandy Hanna on 249 South Franklin. It's an interesting prospect. Thank you for the review of it. I just want to ask one question. Will you be at the same time assessing a comparison of whether the police station's expenses, what it would cost to move it? I think you all received information about what Flemington had found out when they started to move their police station and the amount of cost that it was going to be. I'm just wondering if that's something, once you find out what that dollar figure would be and doing the same kind of comparison analysis of what that's going to do to affect the taxpayers in the community, if there's a possibility even at that point of, would you consider putting the housing on the Clausen farm?
So what I'll say here is that we are working directly with other communities who have done similar adaptive reuse programs. Flemington's was not that. So we know Delaware Township, for instance, had a very similar project where they acquired a single family home and adapted it for use of a police site. As we're also working with New Hope to go over their adaptive reuse how they did their adaptive reuse of their police site to try and address any cost drivers. That being said, and all of those cost drivers will be ultimately factored into what the final cost of the project is going to be that we will produce for the city before the end of the year. So to answer your first question, yes, we expect to have a full breadth of what this is going to cost us to move the police before the beginning of next year. Your second question is, would we consider moving housing onto that hill? What I'll say is that this is, that nothing is off the table, but that I want to remind everybody that this is an opportunity for us to stop the development of a pristine historic farmland. And while other places in the community where we have recommended affordable housing to go are already developed, this is an entirely undeveloped site. And this is an opportunity for us to invest in not only stopping development, but maintaining public open space that has real cultural significance. And so I would have to weigh that pretty heavily against moving, against doing what we're recommending here, which is just maintaining that view shed as it is with no significant changes in perpetuity.
Are you not, though, didn't you just mention that you were thinking of putting the police station over there?
Yes, and Sandy, I want to be very clear, and I'll make it clear to everybody here. The plan to move the police station would be in the house. If you give me 1 second here, I can put this back up on my screen. In the house that already exists there, we have we know that we can, that house could maintain our entire police department with an expectation of growth over the next 10 years without changing the the outer view shed of that property in any way. So we would just be renovating the inside of the building. We wouldn't change the outside at all.
Okay, I didn't know that. All right, thank you very much.
Thank you. Councilwoman Erbish?
Yeah, I do think the point that you made, I just want to kind of emphasize it because it's an important question that Sandy asked. You know, what we are discussing, introducing tonight is solely on the acquisition and preservation of this property. And it does not go, it will not go into detail on what can and cannot go there. So to that point, nothing is off the table. And I think that, the governing body, when I'm no longer on it, will continue to weigh options that come before them. And I'm sure the community advisory team will, be of assistance with some of that. So I just think that that's an important point and I wanted to emphasize it.
Okay. Cindy, I'm sorry to do this. I know you're working a lot of different stuff here. Can we remove Stephen and Sandy and then promote Alicia?
Yes, Tina's back. She's back at the control.
Tina, we missed you.
Okay, thank you. Alicia, please state your full name and address into the record, then proceed with your comment.
Oh, I love being promoted. Alicia Lerman, 101 East Blair Track. I wish it was easy when I was working. I do think that it's great that we're thinking about preservation and open space, but I do have lots of questions on the finances. I didn't quite follow the debt service change and what the debt service, why the debt service would not go down without buying the property. So if you could review that again, it would be great. I also was curious what the projection of maintenance on that site would be long term, and then how we would backfill the approximately $24,000 a year in taxes that we currently get from that property. Yeah, I'm just curious about the overall financials. It just doesn't seem like it jives based on the financial constraints that we're in.
Sure. So I'm going to take these one at a time. There's a couple of things I want to clarify here. The municipality actually only receives about a little under $4,000 a year from the Clausen's property because we only take a little bit over 17% of your full municipal tax load. So it's less than $4,000 a year, which is a negligible amount of money year over year, even assuming, a 2% tax increase every year. You're not getting up to more than $6,000 before the total life of the bond is over.
Right, but the school and the other places, I mean, there's still 20,000 coming from other places, whether the city council, whether it's just in our municipal budget, there's still 24,000 roughly coming out that's got to get made up elsewhere, right? Okay.
Sure, yes, but in terms of the municipal finance, you're asking specifically about my municipal finances, and so the only money I have to solve for is that $4,000. Okay.
Yeah, go ahead about I didn't quite understand the debt service piece.
Sure. So I think the most important thing to remember here is that municipalities are not like businesses, nor are they, and I'm going to just pull this back up here, guys. I'm sorry to be moving back and forth like this.
And Mayor, can I just jump in 1 second? I do want to say, Alicia, one of the things that I've been thinking about is this is complicated stuff that's really kind of hard to explain, let alone understand. And so I've been talking with some folks at the Blaustein School and people that are really experts in municipal finance and teaching it and explaining it. And so what I'm hoping to do is try to pull together, whether it's a video or a virtual meeting or something, to be able to talk about this a little bit more and to have folks that can answer questions like this in more detail. And so I'll certainly reach out to you once I start actually having something really pulled together on that. But I do recognize that this is a challenge. I think it's a perennial challenge that we have at this point in really being able to explain it because it's really complex.
Okay. So, but I think so if I understand correctly, Mayor, what you said was that the yellow line would be as if we didn't buy the Clausen property and that.
No.
Okay.
Sorry. The blue line here is our current funded debt schedule between now and 2033. Okay. So the blue line here and the gray line overlap because the gray line is the total debt service plus the current funded debt year over year. Now, there's a difference between, and I know that this is sort of complicated. I will do my best to clarify. Our debt crisis that we have been talking about is not the total amount of debt that we hold, right? We are below our total capacity to pay debt service. But rather it is the gap in 2021 and 2022 that we have to fill from debt payments. Our expected debt payments in 2021 and 2022 are a real problem. They're a short-term problem, and they're not directly affected by borrowing for the Clausens. Because the way that debt service works is that you put a down payment on a property, and then for functionally 5 years, you pay very little to nothing on that debt, and then it spikes up. So this gray line here, this spike is the down payment, which we are covering through open space. So it doesn't affect our 2021, 2022 shortfalls. Then this gray blue line here is already what we are budgeting for debt year over year. That's changed. The Clausens change nothing. Now this bump here is when the Clausen properties debt comes online. The reason that we put this yellow line in here is because if the amount of pie that we're paying for debt service year over year is really important, right? If we were a business, right, we would take this appropriative line and it would follow the gray blue line. But because we are a government and we're not going to reduce taxes by the $800,000 difference between 2025 and our appropriative line here, we know that we will have we'll have an at least $6 million budget. And that right now we're appropriating $1.4 million in debt service, but our payment in 2025 for debt service will be around $800,000. That difference is why this will be tax neutral. We do not have to increase the pie. The $6.2 million pie can stay the same, and there will be no direct new taxes levied in order to pay for this. So if I can put that a different way, you're already paying $10,000 a year. The estimated cost of this project year over year is about 68 cents. That includes all the studies, everything that we're doing, about 68 cents for the average Lambertville household. We're not asking for 68 new cents. We are just reappropriating 68 cents of your $10,000 tax burden to this project.
Okay, and then the costs to do all the things that need to get done in the next 2 months, where does that money come from?
That will also be included in the total bond and was considered as a part of this debt service obligation. So we are bonding for the study of this project, which we can do because they are soft costs to an ultimate purchase of a property that will have a life of more than 30 years. So there will be no direct tax impact for any of the studies, as well as the potential creation of a police station on this site or another site, and the preservation of the Clausens property.
Thank you.
I think Gina's next. Tina?
Yep. Gina, please state your full name and address into the record, then proceed with your comment.
Hey, this is Gina Fischetti. I'm at 116 Clinton Street. I just had a few questions. So I was wondering if the exception area that you're talking about for the all the buildings would be severable or non-severable exception.
Gina, can I ask you to clarify your question so that maybe the rest of the public can join in on your thought process here?
I'm wondering if the exception area is going to be able to be severed from the preserved portion of the site, or does it have to be in perpetuity kept connected with the preserved land?
So can you just further clarify what you're asking of us? Just so I can make sure that I'm answering the question to the best of my abilities.
Mayor and Gina, I'm sorry, Mayor, can I just jump in for a second? What Gina's asking is will this remain one tract of land in perpetuity? Is that our plan, or is the plan that there would potentially be a possibility that the exception area could be separated out of this tract of land?
So it's an interesting question. I guess what I'm asking of Gina here is to clarify why that would be important. And I'll answer the question. I just want to make sure so that the public, so we're not sort of muddying the waters here and everybody's on the same page.
Well, I think it's important because if the reason why the city is talking about purchasing the site and preserving it is because of how the site relates to the it's the historic value of the site and how it relates to the city's history. And I think it's important to keep the site intact, but also I think that that's, oftentimes one of the goals of preserving land. If you're talking about a historic building that was connected to farmland, it's important to keep the building and the land together. But I mean, really, I'm just wondering what the city's intention is with the site.
Yeah. So I appreciate you clarifying that. So our intention is to the best of our abilities, and pending further study, to maintain this view shed functionally the same in perpetuity, right? So that would include not just the historic home, but also all of the other buildings on this site. That it is not just the farmland that is worth preserving, but rather the Clausen site as it exists today.
Well, right, but maintaining a view shed is different than keeping the site as an intact tract of land. So I guess what I'm wondering is whether or not the exception area is going to be kept as part, if it's all going to be kept as one tract of land, or if the city is going to subdivide it.
As of now, I think it's too early to answer that question. My preference would be to not subdivide this property and to keep it as its full 8.48 acre tract. However, we are, at the beginning of this process here. I've heard some concern about the city trying to, have the historic home, sort of maintained by a not-for-profit, and, what the liability and risk of the city would be for that. So, I think that's open to debate about whether or not we want to subdivide the historic home out and sell it on the open market as a commercial property. I think that's something that we can continue to discuss. While I agree with you that the site should be, in my eyes, this site should be kept intact, I think it's too soon for us to say that we've made a decision on that.
Okay. So then I guess a follow-up question on that would be how doing that, I guess how doing that would impact the city's ability to use the kind of funding that it wants to use to purchase the site.
So I really appreciate you saying that, because this is the really exciting part. All of the financing that we've done for this assumes no sort of retrieval of any preserve funds. Now, we expect, because of our partnership with the New Jersey Conservation Foundation and the Hunterdon Land Trust, that we will be receiving funds back for this, and they are willing, both of them are willing to work with us to sort of advise as we start to make these decisions, to put the city in the best possible place for us to get preservation funds back. And so, they'll be able to help us answer that question. But to be clear, the funding that we've just presented here is not reliant on preservation funds at all. If and when we get preservation funds back, which hopefully we would be able to do to address some of our other budget short-term budget shortfalls, those would be a gimme on the site. We think that this is feasible and affordable to do, even if we don't get preservation funds back.
Okay. Thank you. So I guess, would you say that it's a possibility that the city sells some of the buildings to another entity?
I think that it's too soon for us to say. I think that there's a real concern, and I think this argument is worth having about the maintenance of the historic Washington's headquarters. Again, my strong personal preference is that we find a not-for-profit partner that would be willing to open that space up to the public. But if that's not really a possibility, and we can't find a reasonable, a reasonable next step for that space, then we have to consider subdividing and selling that with protections to ensure that it remains historic and preserved historically. But yeah, I think it's still open to debate about whether or not we can find a better solution than turning this back over to the public market.
Okay. Okay, and then so along the same lines, would another question I had is whether or not additional development in the exception area could possibly be permitted.
So the exception area rules are written thus, and I think you know this, that other buildings could potentially be built within that exception zone. That's one of the reasons we're considering, how we draw these exception zones will be done in partnership with the New Jersey Conservation Foundation and the Hunterdon Land Trust to ensure that we're sort of setting ourselves up for the intent for success within our own intent, right? That we don't want to build more external buildings here. We want to keep this site relatively the same in perpetuity.
Okay. And then another question I had is whether the city is considering putting City Hall or the library or, any other city facility on this site.
It has not come up. I don't know that that's super feasible. But ultimately, I think, again, as we stated at the beginning here, nothing is off the table. We want to be open to alternate possibilities of the highest and best use of this preserved property. But to be totally honest, that's literally never come up.
Okay. And then I just have, I think, just two other questions. So how would not, let's say that after the work that you're relying on the CAT team to do ends up showing or ends up with council determining that they don't want to move the police station to the Clausen site. My question is, how would that decision impact the city's ability or desire to purchase this site?
Thank you so much for that question, Gina. I really appreciate it because I think it's vitally important to say here that we're taking advantage of this opportunity to acquire and study this Clausen preservation site. And while we're doing that, assuming some of these costs for studying alternate sites for the police department in sort of a simultaneous track, but that ultimately the preservation of this property is paramount to this plan. And so even if the police site doesn't fit here, right, it doesn't make financial sense, or there's other sort of contingencies or concerns, we feel confident that that we want to move forward with the acquisition of this property. And even if it's not the right fit for the police station, we'll find alternate uses for the Clausen's current permanent residents.
So I guess if it's not used for the police site, what would it be used for?
That will bear out over the course of our due diligence over the next 6 months. But I think the question at hand here is, the council moving forward in the stage of acquiring this exclusivity on this property and doing our due diligence, and we will be answering that question as it comes to us.
Okay. So would you say that if the police station does not go there, that that would be a scenario where the city would want to sell off that exception area?
Gina, that is getting deep into a hypothetical, and no, the plan is still for the city to maintain the property as a whole with some agreements on easements or other ways in which we can ensure that maintenance of this property, that property is not solely held by the municipality. But I think we're getting deep into the heart of like 4 or 5 versions of what if here.
Okay. Yeah, no, sorry about that. I'm just trying to understand like really what the intention is, and because it does seem like there's kind of like a lot of questions as to what the ultimate goal of the city, what the ultimate goal is with purchasing this. I mean, on
It's
the one
to
hand,
preserve 8.4, yes, Councilman Taylor and then Councilman Urbish. It's to preserve 8.4 acres of land. Go
okay,
ahead. Councilman Taylor.
sorry, go ahead. Sorry.
That's what I was going to just reiterate, that the point here is to move forward with studying these options. The ultimate goal for the property is to preserve what we've heard time and time again as a critical property for the entire community. Potentially move the police here if that works, if it doesn't, come up with another plan, but that plan is what needs to be created. So we don't have all the answers now. We want to get to a place where we have those answers.
Councilwoman Urbish, did you have something to add?
Yeah, I just wanted to say, I mean, the intention is to preserve the property. That's the purpose here. And any additional opportunities are sort of a value add, but preserving the property is the primary thing here.
Okay, just so I can.
Gina, I just want to note here, we also have 3 other people who are waiting in the queue. You've gone far past the 3 minutes of public time. I'll allow you to ask another question, but I just want to be respectful of everybody else's time here.
Okay, yeah, this is really more a comment than a question. And I'll be brief. The reason why I'm asking these questions is because I think it's great that the city is looking at at the property and looking into preserving it. My questions really have to do with this exception area and whether or not it's severable or non-severable. And really, if it ends up being severable and that's what ends up happening, what kind of impact is that going to have on, as you say, this pristine historic farm? And if it's developed additionally, what impact is that going to have on, the goal of preservation because preserving means what is there now, right? Not adding to it necessarily. So I'm just trying to get a feel of really, what direction or what's in your minds about that. So sorry for taking up too much time. I'll let other people go. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, I think we couldn't be more clear here that the goal is to preserve the view shed as is and to preserve as much acreage as possible with very few changes to the law. Okay. Tina, I think Matt Hansen is next.
Yes, Matt, please state your full name and address into the record, then proceed.
Good evening, everyone. I just want to thank you for your time again. And I emailed council earlier with my major thoughts on this. I didn't see the finances till this evening. And I guess I need to digest more of the finances. My question really is the budget that we look at is assuming no changes in the budget, right? Like it was a straight line, imagining we have a $6 million budget for the next however many years. But as we saw this year, the budget changes and things happen, and you're gonna present another ordinance in a little while about a shortfall in the budget. So is this really a wise spend of money right now when we don't know, and is it the right time to do these types of things? I am still questioning all of that and trying to figure it out. We saw the finances tonight, which is good, but I wish we saw those finances earlier. I think this is rushed. I think that we are moving very quickly on something without seeing more detail. We saw those finances now, but I would like to see more. I'd like to have more time to digest some of this stuff based on the fact that based on what happened this year and may happen, who knows what in the future, we can't guarantee that in 30, 40 years, 2052 is a long way to plan off what's going to happen.
Yeah, thank you for your comment. Councilwoman Urbish, did you have something to say?
I think Councilwoman Taylor had her hand up first.
Sure. I'd just like to say really quickly here, municipal budgets very rarely contract, right? They expand. You can look at the old adage, right? The only thing that you can guarantee is death taxes and death taxes. So we know that on that that's a simplified version of that graph, but the graph doesn't actually show what the expectation of the municipal budget is. It shows what we are currently appropriating in our debt. And we look forward to, as Councilwoman Urbish said, we're going to be putting in some teach-ins to really explain this because it is complicated. We'll be releasing our initial numbers, which we've checked with multiple experts in the community. We heard the community loud and clear that they wanted us as a part of future plans to work with community volunteers to get expert advice. We did that. We put together a budget, which we'll be releasing over the course of the next couple of days, as well as with some informational videos on how to read those budgets. But we feel pretty confident in what we think are on what our cost line items are going to be and what the total cost will be for the city. And we know that there will be no direct new taxes levied for this project. You're right, 30 years is a long time to plan out, but that is a part of amortizing debt over time. If you want to think about it differently, we expect that this project will cost the average Lambertville taxpayer over the course of 25 years about $17.22 in their total tax bill. That's not a new $17. That's just a reappropriated $17 of your taxes over 30 years.
And that's per year, correct?
No, it's 68 cents per year. It's $17 for the entire life of the project.
So I might have missed earlier. Are we refinancing or reappropriating funds?
We're not refinancing. We are simply taking what is budgeted, and the piece that we've budgeted for debt service, which is right now about $15 million. As over the course of our debt obligation, we will have space in that budget to basically just move where that 68 cents of your dollars is currently being spent on debt service to a different debt service project. And while we're doing it, we're also starting to make more responsible year-over-year borrowing decisions to get us back on track to what DCA and the GFOA agree is a best practice amount of debt service payment year-over-year. Councilwoman Taylor, you had a comment.
Yeah, thanks, Matt, for your comments. And I received several emails speaking to this point as well. The fact that more information hasn't been made available yet. I understand the concern, but I just want to reiterate that this conversation has come about very quickly because of this opportunity, and out of respect for, what we know this process will be, that others are looking at this property. So, the request was, I want to see more information. I want it to happen more quickly. That is what's going to happen after tonight. There was we need to, or maybe won't, let's see if we vote to introduce this. If we vote to introduce this, that opens up several weeks of review of information and then a public hearing, and the CAT cooperating with the community and the city to make sure that everybody has a chance to see information, think it over, ask questions. So that's exactly what's coming up. This is not a situation where, we're not voting to make this happen tonight. We're voting to think about making this happen tonight. And if we do so, then everybody will be given all the information that they need.
I make one point to Mayor. I'm sorry. Go ahead, Mayor.
No. Please go ahead, Councilman.
We're talking about opportunity, and this opportunity was sort of thrust upon us quickly. The other part of opportunity here is the opportunity for other open space in Lambertville, but there's not much of it. I've been involved over the years in this. We've purchased the land above Ely Field, the Cherry Street Park, and others. And I think were the right decisions. There's not much left in terms of open space in Lambertville. And you all are being taxed 1%, I believe it is, towards this. We have dedicated funding that's built up for this, and that tax is going to continue. So I just wanted to note that, that there's an opportunity thrust upon us One of the questions that I wanted to look at is like, are we crowding out other appropriate things that, you know, might come up? But there really isn't much in Lambertville. This is precisely what these funds are meant for, if it's the right property. So I just wanted to mention that other side of opportunity, if I could.
I think that's a really good point, Councilman. And to that point, sort of, you brought up the financial piece. You know, this is tax money that is already being collected, and it's for these purposes. So I think it makes sense to seize the opportunity, as Councilman Sanders said, and it's using existing tax funds for this exact purpose. And you know, to Councilwoman Taylor's point, we're introducing the ordinance tonight. We have, you know, 20 days of opportunity with the public for discussion, for disseminating more information, to making sure that you have everything you need in sort of deliberating, and an opportunity to ask questions. And then we'll also have a full public hearing on November 20th. So, you know, it can feel a little bit fast because, you know, we're trying to be nimble and work, you know, with how the private market is working, but also building in, by sort of working quickly now, we're able to build in time on the back end to do a lot more due diligence. And again, you know, building in protections, as the mayor went over, for the first 2 months after a contract is signed, should the council decide to move forward with this, there is an opportunity for the city to take a step back based on preliminary investigation into the site, with no impact on our down payment. We would get the full down payment back. And then there, you know, is a schedule going forward, and figuring out how to make the right decisions, but building in protections for the city and the taxpayers. But again, you know, this has to do with taxes that are already being collected. And I think we're doing our best to find the right balance of being responsive to what is going on in the market, being respectful of the taxpayers and respectful of the current property owners, and just trying to do our best by the city across the board.
All right, can we move to
I appreciate everyone's responses. I just want to make a comment at the end here, that I appreciate all of your responses, and I appreciate all the work you do. I moved to Lambertville because it's affordable. And I don't feel that spending more money right now, or bonding more money, is appropriate. We don't know what's going to happen. We don't know what's going on. You're going to vote on a $400,000+ budget shortfall next on an ordinance, I believe. So I just don't think that this is the time to be doing this. I want to preserve history, of course, but I would love to buy a mansion too, but I can't. So I just want to reiterate, I moved here because I'm affordable. I don't want to be a Hopewell. I don't want to be a Princeton. I don't want to be a Raritan Township. I want to live here because it's affordable and we manage the things well. And I think, honestly, the mayor has done well with making sure we do that. But this plan now is going to add $4+ million of debt with no expected costs or expected increases otherwise in budget. So I just don't understand how that works, how we add that into the budget and add that into the cost of things. So
Matt, I'm not totally sure where you're getting your numbers from. And I think that maybe some of this could be cleared up additionally as more information is coming out. I think I would just ask that you remain open to receiving that information and reviewing it. And if you have questions or there's confusion, to ask them, you know, we'll do our best to clarify. But again, this isn't new money. It's money that already exists, and the budget that is, you know, being potentially anticipated here, again, as the mayor said, would be about, you know, $17 over the life of the bond. And again, as old debt is coming off, there won't actually sort of be that feeling on the tax side. But again, just I would ask that you remain open to receiving the information as it's shared in the next couple weeks before the 20th.
I appreciate that. And I'm just clarifying that we had $4 million we're able to spend before tonight.
I'm sorry, what?
You mentioned that $4 million available prior to this.
Yeah, no, sorry. What we're talking about is the open space tax fund. So we have a fund that is
the down payment, correct?
For the down payment, that is correct. I don't know where $4 million is coming from, that
The
number.
mayor put out a video that the estimated cost would be $3.4 to $4.1 million this project.
So that would include sort of a variety of studies. That's all stuff that we're taking a look at here. But again, as we discussed in terms of the contribution of open space tax money, how bonding works and amortization, the impact is approximately 68 cents annually on the average household, $17 over the course or over the lifetime of a potential bond. So
I guess,
of course, everybody has varying degrees of feelings about what affordability means, and everyone is entitled to their opinion. If sort of 68 cents or over the lifetime $17 is unaffordable, I certainly can't argue with that. I mean, that's a subjective, I guess, personal opinion on what constitutes affordability and where we should be spending our money.
no, I understand that. And I've heard for the past 7 months to 8 months that we are in a financial crisis, that things are terrible. And now all of a sudden we have this money to do this. I'm trying to compute that still in my head, that we didn't have money to fix the street sweeper. We had to bond for it last week or approve a bill for it. And we had to figure out pothole fills. We had to figure out sewer drains. And now we have the money. Julie, I appreciate your facial comments, but I don't need them right now, honestly.
I'm going to ask you to be respectful of everybody here on the dais, Matt.
You're making facial comments at me, and I'm just starting to understand how this works. Like, I'm trying to understand how we didn't have money a month ago and now we have money to spend this.
Matt, I understand your confusion here. I think you've made your point. We've asked you to remain open to the possibility that while you don't understand, it doesn't mean it's not true, and that we will do our level best to provide you the information that you and the rest of the public needs to ensure that that our budgeting process makes sense and that this is a worthwhile investment that is, again, tax neutral to the city between now and November 30th. So we've made a commitment to provide that information to you, and I hope you'll be open to hearing it.
I appreciate the counsel. Thank you so much.
Joe, please state your full name and address into the record, then please proceed with your comment or question.
Cindy?
Yes.
Is that, you were referring to me?
Yeah, Joe, you're up.
All right, Joe Donnelly. I live at 50 Delaware Avenue. I'm probably not as much up to speed as a lot of other people are here. I want to say that I think that this is a unique opportunity in a city like Lambertville. I can't imagine that the opportunity of having 8.4 acres coming available would ever happen again. So I do want to applaud you on seizing the opportunity. Would encourage you to do this as thoroughly as you can, and to think not only about the here and now, but really the long term, and that there might be other uses for this property and that would be beneficial for not only people who live here now, but in the decades to come. It's 8.4 acres. That is extraordinary. I do have a couple questions. Actually, I have a long list of them. If I could get a few short answers. And again, I apologize if people are in the know. But what happens to the current police station and that property if the police station were to be moved to the Clausen's home?
Thank you for asking that question, Joe. So the police station has already been identified as a site to build an affordable housing mixed income apartment building. The community advisory team and the council have been debating back and forth on what the design and sort of implementation of that would mean. But basically, we expect to be able to sell that property for a small profit, and have a developer come in and build a 23-unit apartment building with primarily market rate apartments, and then 5 affordable units to help us satisfy our affordable housing obligation.
Thank you. So that would allow that to go forward. Are you looking at any other properties for locating the police?
Yes, we have one other serious opportunity. We're still in negotiations with them, but we expect to be able to go public with that and similar numbers and finances to this potential property before our public hearing on November 30th.
I heard a term used tonight, the exception zone. What is the size of the exception zone?
It's, give me 1 second here. I'm just gonna pull this up really quickly. The exception zone here so this red line is the full Clausen property. The yellow line is the exception zone. It's about 1.9 acres. The rest of this property would be preserved as direct open space, and these would be exemptions from that open space preservation because they have property on the houses on them already, or building structures on them already. And we want to use those for the use of the public good. Right, potentially a police department, potentially a farmer's market, making sure that those continue to be a driver for public good.
And Mayor, if I may just add to that, I mean, we're showing maps and we're giving acreages, and I think that's an important thing to do right now, but none of this is finalized. So this exception area could change in shape a little bit. It could change in size a little bit. So everybody hearing this right now needs to understand this is preliminary work. And so changes may occur.
Thank you for noting that, Councilwoman. I appreciate that.
I appreciate that as well. So roughly right now, just a little over a quarter of the available acreage would be considered an exception zone. Do I understand that to mean that that would be buildable property?
I would not consider that buildable property. I think that was a concern that Ms. Fischetti was bringing to our attention. But the goal here is to preserve the property as is, to not make significant changes to the view shed, and to in perpetuity keep that hill looking pretty much exactly like it looks right
now. This is a process question. The ordinance allows you to go ahead and make a deposit, conduct studies, but you wouldn't be closing on the property, correct? That would only happen after you complete studies and analysis of this property. Is that right?
That's correct. That's a succinct way of putting this. I'll defer to my lawyer in case there's any concerns there, but that's functionally what we're doing here. We're going to go through a due diligence process and look to close at the end of April.
Okay, that's essentially when the Clausens would want to close?
That's when the city would be done with their studies.
Okay.
And deliberations, et cetera, et cetera.
All right, I'm going to reserve my recommendation until I get a little bit more information. But
Great.
thank you.
I appreciate that. But if you do have any ideas, big or small, regarding the property, you should feel free to reach out to me and the members of the community advisory team who are going to be sort of garnering community feedback and relaying that to myself and the council. And if you like, that email address is catchairs, CAT chairs at lambertvillenj.org.
Okay.
All right, super. Thank you.
You bet.
Jeanette, please state your full name and address into the record, then proceed with your comment or question.
Hi, good evening. My name is Jeanette Emmons. I'm at 16 South Union Street. Was hoping if we could, I know there's a lot more information to come out and I look forward to having those details. But the debt schedule that you were showing, the graph that you showed, just for clarity, if I understood correctly, there was a line of our current spending that was a straight line. There was a line of our current debt that was, I believe, gray, that was going down.
Give me 1 second here. I can pull this thing back up for us.
My mind loves graphs, so hopefully I remembered it correctly. But
my mind also loves graphs. I have been preparing a lot of them for this particular presentation. Give me 1 sec here. Sorry. Trying to do this quickly. Here we go. So this is what
that was the blue one.
We're currently budgeting for debt payments. The blue is our current debt schedule. The gray is our current debt schedule plus the Clausen cost. The orange is just the Clausen cost. And the green line is the best practice debt service load. So that's what we should be budgeting every year and paying in debt service, what we are budgeting and paying every year in debt service.
Okay, so the blue line, the current debt service, that is our annual required payments on our current existing debt only, correct?
That's correct.
Okay, so this graph with the gray line that falls under the green dotted best practices line, that includes only our current debt service and what you're anticipating an additional bond would be needed for the Clausen site.
Correct. But we are working on a secondary graph here that will add in the $350,000 to $500,000 of other debt service that we expect. And then a secondary sort of analysis of spending somewhere between $2 and $6 million on our facilities to give us a better picture of the this is really just Clausen focused to talk about tax impact. But to give the public a better view over the next 30 years of what, more responsible borrowing practices, plus a plan to address our facilities, what that tax impact would be versus the best practice load.
Okay, and I think I hear you saying exactly what my question is, which is, this is not the only things that we're going to need to bond over the next several years.
Correct.
And so that 80 cents or whatever you were talking about a year is just this one piece. But as we've heard you say over the past several years, or over the past several months, I guess I should say, about our crumbling, yeah, sometimes about our crumbling infrastructure and all these other needs that we have. I guess I wanted to really clarify that. I don't think, that gray line is lower than it's going to be.
Right. So the gray line is just the current debt service obligation plus the Clausens, and we'll be putting out sort of a longer term budget, sort of a visual graph of what, being able to address all of these issues are, plus our expected budgeted debt service. So we've got, functionally 2 major projects we have to do, or we potentially could do, maybe have to do is the wrong phrase here. We need to potentially move our police site. And I would argue strongly that we should be doing this preservation purchase. And then we have to address our facilities in some capacity. And then, there's the sort of annual capital expenditures that a city expects to make, including, working with DOT funding for paving our roads, managing our vehicles, managing other sort of annual expected expenses. So I understand that this is not perfect, but I think what this shows you is that we still have room here from where the Clausen's total debt service is to the best practices. We have about another $300,000 of debt service payments that are available that would keep us under this line. And then we can have a conversation as a community about whether or not, right now we're spending too much, right? $1.4 million versus $535,000. There's a huge chasm of difference there. But is it worthwhile for us to bump up instead of 8% of our total budget in debt service to 10% if it allows us to do a sort of more holistic project on something like this, or something like our infrastructure in our city buildings. That's, I think, a better place for Lambertville to be having that conversation, right? We're in where we get to a healthy place of total debt service obligation, and then can debate as a community, okay, where can we, what is it worth it to bump up maybe from that 535 to 610, right? Instead of where we are now, which is almost $1.5 million of debt service obligations. It's over, over a sixth of our budget.
Yeah. Okay. I mean, I definitely hear you, and certainly it's an exciting opportunity to think about being able to preserve that property. But I can't disagree with Matt that we've been hearing stories of doom and gloom over the past several months, and now to hear that we suddenly have money to spend does feel a little strange. And just wanted to make sure that we were not looking at this in a vacuum and really acknowledging all of those other things that we've been talking about over the months, and other places that those tax dollars that I keep hearing you say are already there, that, other places that they also need to be spent. So looking forward to seeing the whole picture.
I think, this is not a question. We can't take this one opportunity as sort of like we have to answer the questions, every ill of our community over the course of the next 6 months. But, the goal of really redressing our finances, the doom and gloom is really about 2021 and 2022, both of which are unaffected by this plan, which I think is important to note. And then once we're past that hump and we're into the decline of our accumulated debt service schedule, we'll be able to make some longer term decisions about how, when, and where our community should be spending our capital funds.
Okay. Like I said, looking forward to seeing the whole picture together. Thank you.
Thank you. I think Kate Winslow's next.
Kate, please state your full name and address into the record, then please proceed with your comment. Please unmute yourself.
Yeah, hi. Actually, this is Guy on Kate's computer. We're together. We're at 101 South Franklin Street. And we just wanted to say that overall, I mean, I understand there's lots of questions about the budget, and I understand that you guys are going to be getting deeper into that. But overall, we're just really glad you guys are taking the big picture into consideration in general throughout the whole time. You guys all have been working on all the Lambertville issues, and I think this is a great opportunity. I think this is one of those things in 15, 20 years, 30 years, people are gonna be like, no brainer. I mean, obviously if it works and it's, which it seems like you guys have already been thinking that through. So we just wanted to say thank you for being creative and looking at the big picture. Thanks.
Thanks.
That's all.
Thanks, Guy. And Kate, if you're there too, I appreciate the comment. I think Doug Graver's next.
Yes. Doug, please state your full name and address into the record, then proceed with your comment.
Hi, this is Doug Graver, 406 Sergeant Drive, Lambertville. So I have to apologize ahead of time that I may have missed some of the things I'm going to be asking about. But the first thing is, I've lived in this town for a very long time, and open space to me is really important. So I'm very appreciative of this effort, as I was with the past efforts to preserve open space. And I'm very concerned about 30 houses going there. It just could just fill up the whole area with houses. One of the questions, and this is the part I may have missed, is I know that in the past there's been funds available through New Jersey Farmland Preservation. Was that already covered? Did I miss that?
Yeah, so Doug, we're planning on partnering with the Hunterdon Land Trust and the New Jersey Conservation Foundation to get preservation funds on the back end here. But because this is currently on the open market, right? We want to get it off the market so that we're not competing with developers, and then we can work on getting those preservation funds back to the community.
Oh, that's great.
And I'm sorry, just to clarify really quickly, it's not farmland preservation funds. It would be Green Acres preservation.
Green Acres. Okay.
Yep.
All right, great. Okay. All right, thanks. So one of my friends, so I've been asking a couple of people what their thoughts are, and two people expressed concern that this is just another way to create a space for a municipal complex. So you mentioned it briefly, and Julia, Mayor Fall, you had said that there's no plan on building on this site something like this. Is that true, or?
Yeah, I can state for the record, and sometimes I guess until I'm blue in the face, that we're not, where the intention here is just to maintain this property as it is. It is a cultural and historic gem in our community, and we'd like to maintain that property as exactly the same as what it looks like right now. Now we're going to be studying the use of the buildings that already exist on there, but the goal is to not change those buildings significantly or demonstrably from the outside, and to basically maintain that historic view shed as it is right now in perpetuity.
Okay, that's excellent. That's very good. And there will be income generated, at least. I guess the police, if you move them, would be on one of the buildings, but there's still another house and there's still the market. So there will be some income generated from these properties.
Potentially. I mean, we've also talked about leasing this space to nonprofit, to the farm stand, to a nonprofit that could run it as a not-for-profit to address food insecurity in the community. That's a big idea, right? Or we could lease it to a commercial a commercial proprietor and generate some income from that building, but also make sure that we weren't the ones who were obligated to maintain it. So there's lots of opportunity to answer those questions, but I think we're a little early there.
Okay.
We just want to make sure that we can gain exclusivity and do our due diligence.
Okay, so the last thing I want to say, I really appreciate the foresight you're showing in kind of working on this property. So I'm hoping this will move forward and succeed. So thank you.
Thanks, Doug.
Yep.
Suzanne, please state your full name and address into the record, then please proceed with your comment or question.
Hi, my name is Suzanne Jatomer at 73 Clinton Street. I just want to add that I'm so thankful we have a council that sees a great opportunity like this. We can't always plan for great opportunities like this, but you did, and you knew what to do. And it's bold. It has to be bold, and it just really is a wonderful thing. One of the commenters said they moved here for affordable cost. You could argue that very few places in New Jersey are affordable, but I think that my husband and I moved here because of its historic character. It's a great little town, and part of the reason is for that property there. So, and I just want to emphasize that most municipalities would probably wait until a developer bought that property and then spend a lot of money and effort litigating to keep it from being developed. And I'm really just so pleased that we have a council that had that vision to bring that property into the fold of our own little town here and our own municipality. So thank you. And also, you guys are very, very accommodating to our residents. 3 minutes is more than anybody needs. And as someone who's been waiting to talk, you just are the best as far as listening to people's questions and comments and going on and on. And, you don't have to do that. So kudos to you for doing that. But being someone who waited in line, it was hard. So with that, thank you.
Thank you, Suzanne. Tina, we've got somebody who's a second repeat. We've got 2 other people in line here.
Yes.
Perfect.
No problem. Stephanie, please state your full name and address into the record, then please proceed with your comment or question.
Hello, Stephanie Moss, 12 Delavan Street. I just wanted to say that kudos to you guys for jumping on this unique opportunity to keep open space and our town near there the way it is, and not where we would have some overdevelopment. I think I've seen signs around town that say stop overdevelopment. And it sounds to me like you've kind of listened to that. And this gives us a unique opportunity for community space. I do have one quick question. The open space dollars, it's not like that those dollars could be spent on fixing the sweeper or doing potholes, right? Aren't the open space dollars designated for open space only?
That's correct.
So it's not like it's found money. It's been there to do exactly what you're looking to do. And I thank you for that. And I won't take any more of your time. So that's my 2 cents. Thanks.
Thank you.
Beverly, please state your full name and address into the record, then please proceed with your comment or question. Beverly, please unmute yourself.
Yeah, I don't really have any. I was just sort of listening, though it does sound like a wonderful opportunity, and I hope it goes forward.
Thank you, Beverly.
Gina, please. Yes.
Before we move forward here, I just want to note, this is not the public hearing for this. So I think out of some amount of respectfulness for our council and the rest of our agenda, this will be our last question. We'll obviously have public comment at the end if there's something that you would like to add, but we're going to move on to the rest of our agenda after this.
Gina, please state your full name and address to the record, then proceed with your comment or question.
Thank you so much for letting me ask one final question. I just was hoping that you could clarify how many units could be built on this site as it's currently zoned, because something on the website, Facebook said 30 units, and then someone today said 30 units, but then I know Councilwoman Taylor and maybe Councilwoman Urbish were saying 11 or 11.5. So if you could just clarify that, please.
My reading of the zoning ordinance is that it's 11.5 units at 1.3 acres per unit. That rounds up to 12. There are what appears to be conflicting information in the zoning, and that original conflict came from that 1.3 density requirement units per acre versus a 10,000 square foot minimum lot requirement. But the density figure takes precedence. So it's my reading and the city planner's reading that given current zoning, it's 12 units per acre. As Councilwoman Urbish mentioned earlier, it's quite possible that any developer who purchased this property would come to us for a variance, but we don't know what that would look like. So under base zoning, that's where I come down.
And that conflict, I wasn't aware of. I knew that there was a conflict between the base density and the underlying zoning. I stand corrected at this meeting, and moving forward, we will be using the 12 unit minimum.
Thank you.
Okay. With that, we have a lot left to get through. Cindy, would you mind, can we demote Sarah Gold, or Tina, I guess, can we demote Sarah Gold? And then I'm going to ask for a motion to introduce ordinance number 14, authorizing the purchase of block 1002, lot 41, commonly known as 2260 North Main Street and or the Clausen's property. Councilman Sanders for the first. Councilwoman Urbish for the second. Can I get a roll call vote?
Councilman Sanders.
Yes.
Councilwoman Taylor.
Yes.
Councilwoman Urbish.
Yes.
Council President Sarah.
Yes.
Mayor Fall.
Yes, I'm really looking forward to providing the community with more information as we move forward, and for the public hearing on the 30th. Moving on. We have Council President, can I kick this agenda back to you?
Of course. Give you a break from talking for a minute. That was a great discussion. So we have two first readings. The first is ordinance number 15-2020, an ordinance to amend the Lambertville City General Ordinances 2014 to include a handicap parking space in front of 29 North Franklin Street. Am I correct in assuming that Lieutenant Brown has okayed this?
Yes, Lieutenant Brown and Lester have both identified this site.
Lester, okay, great. Any questions from the council about this? All right, can I get a motion to approve on first reading ordinance number 15-2020? Thank you, Mayor. And a second, and Councilwoman Taylor. And Cindy, if you could please do a roll call.
Councilman Sanders,
Yes.
Councilwoman Taylor,
Yes.
Councilwoman Urbish,
Yes.
Council President Sarah,
Yes.
Mayor Fall.
Yes.
All right, so we're moving on to the first reading for ordinance number 16, an ordinance to amend the general code of the city of Lambertville, chapter 7, traffic, section 4.5, parking time limited on certain streets to remove 2 parking spaces on the southwest side of Bridge Street with a 20-minute maximum time limit Sunday through Saturday. So why are we removing this? I'm perfectly fine to do it,
Just really briefly here, this was an original amendment made for when the chamber was at the corner of Bridge Street and North Main. We removed 2 meters and allowed for free parking there to encourage interaction with the chamber. The chamber is no longer there. These are 2 premium spots. We're just putting our parking meters back up.
Sounds good. Any questions? All right, can I get a motion to adopt on first reading ordinance number 16-2020?
So moved.
Thank you, Councilman. Thank you, Councilwoman. And if you could please do a roll call, Cindy.
Councilman Sanders,
Yes.
Councilwoman Taylor,
Yes.
Councilwoman Urbish,
Yes.
Council President Sarah,
Yes.
Mayor Fall.
Yes.
All right, Mayor, I think it's back to you for the CMFO.
Sure. We've got Chris Battaglia here, who is our CFO, who can, I think, help explain what's going on here. Functionally, the city of Lambertville, because we're in the county of Hunterdon and partially because of our size, did not receive any CARES Act funding to help fund the difference between our revenue shortfalls, the unexpected expenditures from COVID. The state has adopted a plan to get some of those funds to communities who are overlooked by CARES Act. And while we wait for those, this is an emergency resolution to fill that gap so that instead of bearing the cost of the loss of revenue because of COVID and the unexpected expenditures, it sort of helps us delineate that over time. So instead of bearing that cost up front in next year for the taxpayers, we exceed that out over time. It also gives the state a little bit more time to get their stuff together to do what they promised to do, which was give us some relief on COVID. Finally, this is something that is while this is a bond, this is a little bit different than, sort of the other work that we're bonding for. This is specifically around COVID. It was approved by the state legislature and signed by the governor. So, we wanted to bring Chris on to ask any questions that you guys might have about this process. But we do feel like this is the best way to put Lambertville in the right position to be able to fulfill our budget for next year and to address what has been a tough year because of COVID-19. So I guess I'll open up for council questions first. Does the council have any questions for Chris regarding this emergency resolution? Councilman Urbish.
So this is obviously a unique circumstance. Was this sort of, is this based on like best practices and recommendations? Obviously it is unique, but I just want to, I know that you have done your due diligence on this, but I think it would be good for the public to hear about it a little bit.
Sure. So, and actually, this will also address. I got a question from Councilwoman Taylor as well that Cindy had forwarded me to. So hopefully, I can address both of them with the same answer here. The special emergency traditionally is for certain items like maybe a tax assessment, or if you have tax reassessment or revaluation, or a terminal leave payments for severance liabilities. Those are the kinds of things that are traditionally included in a special emergency authorization. And what it allows you to do is it allows you to raise that money over a number of years rather than taking the brunt of it in 1 year. What they did this year, and this is brand new. So when it had first been put on the agenda at the last meeting, we were lined up to be the first municipality to put this application in. There were no other ones before that. I had spoken with Matt Jessup at McManaman Scotland Bauman. He was very involved in putting this together, and we tried to put this together the best way that we can possibly do it. And what the guidelines allow us to do is, instead of just covering expenses associated with COVID, they recognize that the bulk of the problem that every municipality faced was a shortfall in revenue, which there was no traditional outlet to accommodate that. So in Lambertville's case, what we did is we said, well, we can't charge the taxpayer because we're not going to collect revenue. So we need to offset that with some of our reserves. And then when they adopted the special emergency, they said, well, we don't want you to deplete your reserves to deal with this problem. We want to give you the opportunity to raise that over a number of years. And it ends up being 5 years, but they don't require you to raise it in next year's budget. So it's really 6 years of payments, but only 5 of actual payments in the budget. So 6 years of a note that you can sell notes for the total amount of deficit in revenue plus expenses, but you're raising that over 5 years. So the way that we came up with the amount, the guidance was very gray. So we tried to make it as reasonable as possible. And ultimately what we did is we took a look at the 4 major categories that we experienced our loss of revenue. And that was the municipal court, the parking meters, the construction code fees, and the hotel and motel occupancy fees. So those were the biggest items. I don't know that we have to go into detail, but basically the court and the construction were pretty much closed. Not much going on. Parking meters, no one was going out. Hotels, no one was staying in hotels, right? So it was all the main items that were pretty easily identifiable. And what Lambertville did in their budget to accommodate that was we anticipated fewer dollars, and we offset that with some of our reserves. So what I did, and what the guidance allowed us to do with future budgets, is I took a 3-year history of our average revenue that we received in those 4 categories, and took an average number and compared it to what we had received year to date as a shortfall. And on the revenue side, that came to right about $395,000 just for those 4 items. And that's using 3-year averages. So if you look at our high years, it would be even a bigger loss. And it really was because last year was one of our higher years. So part of that application was to cover $395,000 in lost revenue, and that's being conservative. That's not even pushing the envelope and asking for $600,000, which maybe we could have, and maybe they would reject it, and then we would go back and hopefully meet somewhere in the middle. But we would burn a lot of time doing that. And then I took the actual expenses that we had for COVID, which came to about $43,000. So the number that you have, and those are all reimbursements, right? So it's not taking into consideration, it's not like we're going to receive a pile of money and decide what to do with it. This is all strictly reimbursing us for either deficit in revenue or expenses that we already had. And what that will allow us to do is not have a deficit in operations or deplete our reserves. And I believe that that's the basis of this legislation. It's to not have the municipalities take the brunt and see a reduction in their fund balance or see them deplete reserves that they had otherwise been maintaining for other purchases or other events that occur.
Or in our case, debt service.
Or in our case, debt service, correct. Because that was the main reserve that we depleted this year. So what that would do, and I'm anticipating, again, I just spoke with bond counsel a couple days ago, and I asked him if any other applications had been submitted that he was aware of. He said no. He's got about 10 of them that are on agendas for this week. So we're going to be right in that first wave of applications that they receive. They're optimistically saying that they're turning around the applications very quickly. It was very strange. These applications are due by December 1st, but they have 45 days to approve them, which takes you into the following year. So they said that they're going to turn it around very quickly because we need to accommodate this in the current year. But again, this is completely unknown territory. So we're kind of navigating slowly. So what we need to do is we need to approve a couple of things. We need to approve, first of all, that the dollar amounts that are on here are due to COVID, which, I have the account backup for the $43,000 in expenses. And on the spreadsheet that is part of the submission, I have 3 years of actual versus anticipated revenue for those 4 categories. And they total just under the amount that we're requesting in the special emergency. And I'm expecting that they come back and maybe they ask for some more justification, and that number can go plus or minus. We'll most likely have to go back to council for subsequent approval once they review the application. At minimum, we would keep everybody informed of what the requests are and where we are. So hopefully that addresses the question a little bit.
Yeah, and I just want to say here also that beyond reaching out to our own bond counsel, we also reached out to folks who were representatives of the GFOA, which is the Government Finance Officers of Association. So basically, we reached out to sort of the leagues, the state's version of the league for finance officers, and had conversations with them. We reached out to other experts in the field to sort of make sure that, particularly because we thought we were sort of on the very cusp of this, that this was really worth doing. And what we heard sort of writ large is exactly what Chris just said. This bill was passed in the legislature, signed by the governor, because they didn't want to put municipalities who were unable to receive CARES Act funding from the feds in a position where we were depleting our reserves and putting the burden of COVID back on the taxpayers for next year, which was the conversation we were having during our budget discussion in April of this year, just in the middle of the pandemic. So, Chris, I want to thank you for your work here. Yeah, Councilwoman Taylor.
Yeah, thank you, Chris. That helps. A couple questions, and forgive me if these are naive. So I think I understand the big picture here. I'm not sure I understand all the nitty gritty. So this funding is going to come in and count as revenue in this budget year. Is that correct?
That's the net result. It gets credited to operations, which is the account that the deficit in revenue will fall to. So the deficit will be offset by this credit in operations. And the goal for the division is for that to net zero. They're not looking for you to make money on this, but they're making sure that you don't lose money. And that was actually one of the stipulations in this, is that if we anticipate, or if we estimate high, if $438,000, or in this case it's $395 for revenue, is more than what our deficit will be, then we need to cancel it before the end of the year. So that would just be another resolution saying, it ended up being 350, now 395. We need to cancel the $45,000 balance. But
Okay.
Yes, it would be a credit to operations.
And I get it that we're not dealing with like dollar bills in my wallet, but where does this money go, and are there restrictions on how we spend it?
So it's already it's not spendable money. So what it's doing
Okay.
is reimbursing us for money that we would have otherwise received by way of court revenue or parking fees or hotel and motel occupancy fees. And it's replenishing the reserve that we would have otherwise depleted, and that would have been fund balance in this case, because operations falls down to fund balance. So what happens is when we authorize this special emergency, part of the authorization will be to allow us to sell notes on this $438,000. And the notes will then be the cash that we receive to reimburse us. So until we actually sell those notes, it's not physical dollars, but once we do, the cash will come into our account, and we'll have to pay it back over the next 6 years.
Okay. So the money, and I won't, if I don't get it after this one, I'll call you later. So there will be actual cash money that is in our city's accounts once we sell these notes, but the accounting for those dollars is going to go back into line items that were not fully filled out this year because of the circumstances, or reserves that we spent. Is that right?
It's not spendable cash, and I can try to make this easier. Let's say we had a budget of $1 million, and we had miscellaneous revenue of $200,000, and the rest of it, the $800,000, was raised in taxes. If we're short $200,000 in this miscellaneous revenue, which are the where the 4 categories are, it's in miscellaneous revenue. Even though we're only getting $800,000 in taxes, we still have $1 million of expenses. And that puts us at a $200,000 deficit. So the cash that comes in is just going to cover that deficit. So it's money that's already spent, but it's not spent for a specific item. It's just spent as our overall budget.
Okay, got it. Thank you. That's very helpful.
You're welcome.
Can I ask a couple quick questions? Yeah, Chris, thanks for that the background. The one question I have is that the timing. Well, first of all, let me make a comment that the you have to play the hand that you're dealt with, but it sure seems like the federal government should have provided some relief to municipalities. But this is the lot that we have.
I'm talking to Bonnie Watson Coleman's staff every single day about this.
Yeah, but anyway, but the timing of our budget was such that we had contemplated reduced revenue in hotel, parking, in all these areas. So I have sort of a fundamental confusion around if we had contemplated less revenue and some additional expenses in our budget, why are we short?
Didn't we, I'm trying to remember back, it feels like a lifetime ago. I feel like we had this debate over were we going to feel all of the loss in this year if we were going to try to spread it out over 2 years, or we were going to put it off until next year entirely and not deal with it this year and hope that there was some sort of fix in the meantime. And I think we decided to put it all off, right?
So
accurate?
Yes. So Councilwoman Urbish is right. Councilman Sanders, one of the ways in which we anticipated a reduction in revenue and sort of was still able to fund a budget that was not a shrunk budget was to use our reserve for debt service to a much larger extent this year than we did, sort of killing that reserve for debt service to create a lack of impact, COVID impact this year, and to sort of deal with it next year, assuming that help was on the way, as Councilwoman Urbish said. What this does is it allows us to refund some of the reserve for debt service that we've burned on making the feeling of COVID not feeling the COVID burden this year. This allows us to sort of claw some of that back and spread this out over time.
And Councilman, I think that I started smiling a little bit when you started talking, because I was kind of getting the feeling that you were going towards, the $1 million question right now. The gray area in this legislation is, are the municipalities like Lambertville that were proactive in addressing COVID going to be penalized by the state for doing that? And the reason why I say that is because we could have anticipated the full amount of our revenue that we got last year. And we know, like with certainty, that we were not going to get it. And if that were the case, this special emergency that we're adopting tonight might have been $900,000. And we would have been able to raise that $900,000 over 6 years. And that would have definitely been better than depleting our reserves. So the question is the state going to penalize us for being proactive, right? Are all the municipalities, because there were municipalities that had their budgets adopted before COVID even hit, and they're in that exact position, and there was nothing they could do about it. But they're getting bailed out by this special emergency. Other municipalities were more proactive. We reduced our revenue. We figured out a way to make it work this year, just in case we didn't get this kind of help. And the question is whether they're going to penalize us for that. I'm hopeful that the answer is no. But I think that the intent of the legislation was to prevent us from having to deplete our reserves, and the end result is that we had to deplete our reserves to accommodate the reduction in revenue in 1 year without taxpayers.
Sorry, what's the penalty? Sorry, where if I just, Councilman Sanders, just one quick question. The potential penalty you're talking about, do you mean that they would just not approve us because there's so many munis with bigger need?
Can I try to answer that? The penalty is that because we had forethought in our budget and reduced our expected revenues, we can't make the same argument as a Lambertville that hadn't made those more responsible decisions up front. If we had gone back and seen that budget as a fork in the road in COVID, we took the fork of a more responsible choice to reduce our expected revenues and to deplete our surplus. We could have just said, we don't know, we're going to do our budget just like we normally do. And if we had done that, we would be able to be doing an emergency appropriation now for a far greater amount.
No, I get that, but what's it is what it is. The legislation is what it is. So what's the penalty? There's no going forward penalty, I guess, is what I'm saying, right?
No, the going forward penalty is that you are in a position where you didn't get the opportunity to spread a larger dollar amount over that number of years. So we might be spending, spreading the $400,000 over a number of years instead of $900,000 over a number of years. Mm-hmm. And it's just a matter of the timing. There's not much, we're not looking to take advantage of anything, but had we adopted a budget 2 months earlier without any idea that COVID was going to happen, that would have been the position that we were in, and it was split down the road, as I'm sure you could imagine. There were towns that said, we're anticipating it, we're not making any changes, we're adopting it as is, we'll see what happens. And then there were the towns that put a little bit more thought into it and said, well, hopefully we can manage this on our own without having to worry about a bailout. And in our case, the worst case scenario is we depleted that reserve for debt service and we have to figure it out moving forward. This is our opportunity to get that back. Sorry. Go ahead, I'm sorry.
Okay, I thought I interrupted you. I thought that, the state law was an ability to do a special bonding to spread this out over a couple of years. And I know that there was CARES Act funding for larger sized, entities. But I thought that there was some provision that whether it was CARES Act funding or otherwise, that would have provided not an opportunity to borrow, but some opportunity for refunding of actual expenditures. Am I mistaken in that?
So really quickly here, we're talking about three separate things, right? The CARES Act funding was federal dollars that was pushed through the state and then identified for particular communities and counties, 100 of which was not one.
Right, too small.
That's one. Two is this special emergency appropriation to deal with the loss in revenue. And then three, I believe this is what you're talking about, you can tell me I'm wrong here, is that the state has budgeted a certain amount of money to pay communities back for expenses. That
Yes.
is we have gotten no guidance from our federal representatives or from our state reps on how that money is going to be doled out. I've been on calls with the governor. I've heard a lot of different answers on that, but at this time, there's no guarantee of when or if that money is coming to a community as small as Lambertville.
Okay, and so our expenses, you said, were $43,000, if I remember correctly. So if those funds were to come in, and at the end of the year, you're saying this number of $438,000 could be recalibrated depending on where our revenue shortfalls sort of land. Is that correct?
That's the idea, correct.
Okay. Okay.
And I think to also answer your question, all those categories that the mayor just addressed, CARES, the grant to the state,
Yes.
that addresses your appropriations only. This is the only avenue to address your shortfall in revenue.
Yep, understood.
Okay. Are there any other questions from the board? Hearing none, can I get a motion to pass this?
To introduce.
Sorry, can I get
Resolution.
a motion to adopt this resolution number 131, 2020?
So moved.
That's Council President Acero for the first,
Second.
Councilwoman Urbish for the second. Can I get a roll call?
Councilman Sanders.
Yeah, I'm going to vote yes to propose this. I do have a couple of questions, and I apologize. I got sort of bogged down with some personal issues this weekend. But if Chris, maybe I could follow up with you and Mayor afterwards to follow up on those questions. But I'll vote yes to propose this.
Councilwoman Taylor.
Yes.
Councilwoman Urbish.
Yes.
Council President Asaro.
Yes.
Mayor Fall.
Yes. Next, ordinance number 13, authorizing a special emergency appropriation in the amount of $438,000 or such other amount certified by the Director of the Division of Local Government Services for the purposes set forth in the NJSA 40A 453L and or the NJSA 4A 453M in and by the Borough of Lambertville in the County of Hunterdon, New Jersey. Can I get a motion to introduce ordinance number 13 with a public hearing scheduled for November 30th?
So moved.
Second.
Can I get a roll call?
Councilman Sanders.
Yes.
Councilwoman Taylor.
Yes.
Councilwoman Urbish.
Yes.
Council President Asaro.
Yes.
Mayor Fall.
Yes. Okay, I believe that's all of the action we're taking tonight. Great. Couple of quick announcements here. Veterans Day is tomorrow. There's going to be a brief ceremony honoring veterans tomorrow, November 11th at 11 a.m. At the American Legion. All are welcome to come and participate and to celebrate the veterans who live with us in our community and across the country. All city offices will be closed on November 11th in honor of Veterans Day. Garbage and recycling scheduled for Wednesday, which is tomorrow, will be picked up on Thursday. Spread the news. I'd also like to note here, we are doing a free recycling day for the city, for the community. It starts at 9 a.m., ends at 11, also at the American Legion. This is in partnership with the County of Hunterdon and the City of Lambertville. I want to thank Cindy Ege for all the work that she did on ensuring that this was possible. We have a list of potential electronics that you can recycle. I know for all of the folks who participated in Sparkle Week this year, we've all done some really significant spring cleaning as we were locked in our homes. I have 2 printers that neither of which work. I'm looking forward to recycling at this time. Please feel free to come by and take advantage of this service. We are doing some free parking on Thanksgiving Day. You're welcome. And then we are also announcing that we will be doing the free parking for the weekend of December 17th through December 25th in support of our downtown businesses. Finally, we are sending out a letter to all of the folks, and I'm woefully behind on this. Apologies, Council President Acero. We're sending out a letter soon to all of the members of our boards and commissions who are up, and reminding them that their term is ending, and asking that anybody who has made it through to 9:30 on this call should really consider getting involved in our community. This is an opportunity for you to apply. We had a record number of volunteers apply to our community boards last year, and we are hoping for an even larger wave of volunteers. So you can reach out to myself and Council President Acero. We'll be dealing with the appointments. Last thing, and then we'll turn it over to public comment. The state of New Jersey, through the election this year, has legalized recreational marijuana. It is obviously still getting worked out in the legislature about how what the rules of the road of that is going to be. We are appointing a 3-person commission to study the zoning and other potential implications for our central business district, as well as our zoning and planning boards as we move forward. We want to make sure that we're making the best possible decision in terms of implementation of these rules as they come from the legislature and from the governor's office. So I want to thank the poor souls who have agreed to do this this particular work. Allison Kapicki, Mark Cullison, and Reggie Ross have agreed to man this board and to come back to the council with a recommendation, to come back to the council and to our planning board and zoning boards with recommendations about how we're going to be implementing. That's that. We'll be setting up an email for them if you guys have any questions, and then the council will be doing all of the public hearings on this. They're just going to be making initial recommendations. Okay. With that, I think we'll open up for public comment.
Okay. Paul, please state your full name and address into the record, then proceed with your comment or question.
Paul Stevens, 39 Quarry. So back on August 30th, I sent an email to the mayor and the council members, and of those addressees, only Councilwoman Taylor was the one that gave any sort of response at all. So I'd like to take this opportunity, and by the way, thank you, Councilwoman Taylor, for at least responding to my email. At this time, I'd like to read that email because I think it's germane now that we're starting to talk about where the police station might end up. So, dear Mayor and Council, Paul Stevens of 39 Quarry Street here. You might recall that I first voiced my concerns on the sale of the YMAT property at the council meeting of February 20th, 2020. I was encouraged to learn in June that the city was investigating the tax status of the YMAC. My attempt to find out the outcome of the investigation, however, had gone unanswered. So I'm writing this email to urge the city to fully investigate the possibility that back property taxes are owed on the property. I've attached 3 documents that lead me to believe that there could be back property taxes owed on the YMAC property. The first document is a LexisNexis summary of New Jersey legal cases associated with the New Jersey property tax exempt law. It was supplied to the planning board by the council representing the seller of the YMAC property. The 2 other documents are copies of the first and second pages, respectively, of what appears to be the YMAC incorporation document. I say appears to be because the document is unsigned, but however, it was located in the Hunterdon County records, but attempts to locate a record of the submission to the state have been unsuccessful. In the case summary, the following points are stressed about property tax exemptions. For tax exempt status, the property must be organized and actually used exclusively for the exempt purposes. The stated purpose is determined by the owning entity's statement of incorporation. The burden is on the claimant to bring itself within the exemption provision, and the burden is on the claimant to prove the tax exempt status. Point 2 of this first page of the WIMAC incorporation document states the purpose of the WIMAC. Although one of the purposes is covered by the tax exempt status, I contend that the other stated purposes do not fall under the allowed purposes. I believe that Mr. Opel has stated that the WIMAC was granted tax exempt status under an old law. However, as the case law summary indicates, the claimant must bring itself into exemption status provision as it evolves over time. Furthermore, it is on the claimant to prove that its tax exempt status, to prove its tax exempt status. This begs the question, has the WIMAC proved that it has maintained tax exempt status throughout its history as the status definition evolved? I hold that fully resolving this issue prior to the close of any sale of the property is paramount, especially during the ongoing budget crisis. If the answer is no, I contend back taxes are owed. If the taxes cannot be paid by the WIMAC, the city might be able to take over ownership of the property. At a minimum, Lambertville could then sell the property and receive the proceeds. I suggest a better use for the property from the city's perspective could be as a new home for the police station. Purchase of a new property would not be needed. An interim move might not be necessary. The site has direct access to Route 29, so that it does not have to go through town on emergencies. So, in closing, I urge the city to fully investigate the tax exempt history of the WIMAC. Thank you for your time and consideration of my thoughts. Be well, Paul. That was my letter. I still have not received a response from anybody but Councilwoman Taylor. Now that we are talking about where the police station might go, I feel this is still germane. And Mr. Opel's my recollection of Mr. Opel's letter to the planning board was that it only covered the original granting of the tax exempt status. It had nothing to do about whether or not it was maintained over the interim period. So,
Paul, just before I allow Mr. Opel to answer, the reason I feel that we have covered this ad nauseum at multiple planning board meetings and provided an answer to the community on the tax exempt status of the YMAC. This is a well-tread ground for folks who have been, as I know that you have, been at every YMAC hearing. So I'll allow Mr. Opel to again answer this question.
Well,
but I want to be clear here that, excuse me, Mr. Stevens, we allowed you to finish. I want to be clear here that this conversation has been closed in the eyes of the city. We do not think that this argument holds merit, and we'll again explain that to you as we have done in the past, both at the planning board and through other avenues.
Mayor, let me respond to you. And yes, I want to hear from Mr. Opel, because what he has stated, to the best of my recollection, did not say that they had maintained it. You might consider it to be closed, but I don't.
Well, that is clear, Mr. Stevens. But again, we feel that from the city's perspective and from our legal perspective, again, that this issue is closed. So, Mr. Opel, would you like to address this?
Sure. The property was granted a tax exemption over 30 years ago. I say over 30 years because the city's tax assessor's records only go back that far, and as far back as he could go, the property was exempt. The statute that provides that exemption is the original stated purpose for the use of this property. The city received no indication that at any point in time it changed. When this application was made to the planning board, it did become apparent to the city that the use was going to change. For that reason, the tax assessor then took the appropriate next steps to put it back on the tax rolls as soon as the property closes. As far as the city can go, we can't, absent a clear indication of fraud, the city can't go back and assess years and years of property taxes at this point, when there was no indication that the exemption was no longer in use. So that's the reason why the city really doesn't have a role to play in a private transaction between a property owner and a, contract purchaser. That was the reason for that the city decided to proceed as it did. And that's basically the answer.
Mr. Opal, what did you use to decide the basis of the tax exempt status? You said that it was granted under no law, yes, but somehow there has to be something. And like I say, it goes back to the incorporation. And there were 4 purposes that were in the only incorporation documents that any of us have been able to find. Only one of those would meet the criteria today. The other 3 would not. So the rule is that they have to maintain, as provisions change, they have to maintain their tax exempt status by changing their charter.
Well,
If
you
they have
mentioned
to
that
prove
one still
let me-
exists. That's
now, let me-
that's
can
what
I
shows
have-
up on the tax assessment records that the city has. I have it pulled up right in front of me. It's NJSA 54:4-3.24. That still shows as an exemption for this property.
I'm
And
sorry.
so I want to again repeat here. Mr. Stevens, when you initially brought this to me months ago, we thought that it was a worthwhile option to pursue. We took all of the necessary steps to track information down, to ask the question that you're asking now, which is, are there back taxes owed? And we came to the conclusion through work with our legal counsel, the planning board attorney at the time, our city's tax assessor, as well as our multiple other experts in the field. And we determined that this is not a viable argument to be making. The city closed this conversation. Mr. Opal is telling you point blank that we have backup.
We have no legal way to collect back taxes, and further, we have a different procedure in place, frankly, these days. Based on my conversation with the tax assessor, we now have documentation that a property owner who's seeking this exemption has to certify as to why they feel they're entitled to an exemption. The city, the tax assessor then reviews that and makes the determination. And then has the paper behind it to track it going forward to see if that use changes. We don't have these records, which is why I was a little bit vague saying it's been exempt for over 30 years. We don't have the original exemption. It's been ongoing. We're not aware of any change. The assessor assumes that it's still used for the club purpose, which is what the state exemption for. And therefore we have no way that we can go back and collect an unknown number of years of back taxes on this property just because we might think that it's maybe not used for the same purpose as it was whenever it received the exemption. The records just aren't there long-term.
Well, the law would, the case studies would say that the onus is on the claimant, not on the city to prove it.
And going forward, it is. We have the records now. For this property, we don't. It's been monitored. There's been no indication of change. But, now we can, my understanding of the process now, if somebody submits for an exemption, we have the record and we can make sure that they're sticking to why they think they need the exemption or why they think they're entitled to the exemption. We can do that now. The records here just don't allow us to do that. It was kind of just based on the tax assessor's knowledge of why they had the exemption and what their continuing use was, the exemption was maintained. And
Mr.
that's
Opal,
what we were.
I appreciate your willingness to run this out and really try and explain this. Mr. Stevens, I don't feel that there's anything more that we can do than answer this on the multitude of different potential public hearings that we've done this on. there's nothing left for the city to answer here. So I'm going to close this conversation and assume that we'll be hearing from you separately on this issue.
Mayor, this is the first time we've had a chance to address Mr. Opel in particular on these issues. On none of the other cases has there been this sort of in-depth discussion, okay? So thank you for giving me the opportunity to talk to the Mr. Opel about this. But I do contend that you had not put this to rest before now. So good night.
Are there any other public comments at this time? Hearing none, can I get a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second?
All in favor, say aye.
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 Good night, everybody.
Guys,
Thanks, everybody.
Good night.